Okay, I'm going to read a quick part out of this to let you know that Saarah Baartman wasn't just a completely exploited woman. A few evenings since the Hot Now Venus paid a chair visit to a vulnerable British duke who still preserves a taste of choice things. After a microscopic inspection of her prominent beauties, she danced to the exquisite satisfaction of his grace, a select party of amateurs of natural productions. The press revealed, the media at the time revealed, that Saarah danced an African fandango in a style of true savage simplicity. There was also a man at the time by the name of, I just refer to him, I think his name was Greenville Q. They used to call him Mr. Q. Mr. Q was like the richest man in Britain. To give you an idea of how rich he was, this motherfucker had a silver bathtub and he used to bathe himself in milk and aloe. The only thing was, he was 86 years old. He basically paid Peter Caesars and Mr. Dunlap a lot of money to let Saarah Baartman live in with him. And he would allow her to bathe in this bathtub full of milk and aloe. Old Q grew very close to Saarah Baartman. He bought her a lot of jewels, a lot of clothes, perfume, and he took care of her. And, you know, just like I read, she was somebody who was brought to some of the most elite people in Britain at the time. But like I said, eventually trouble would come her way again and things would go downhill. What wound up happening was that after 3.5, 4, somewhere between 3 and 5 years, her popularity got low. You know, people became accustomed to seeing her. And she disappeared. When she reappeared 2 years later, for a whole year, Caesar and Dunlap had disappeared out of her life. When they disappeared, she disappeared. Saarah Baartman had a drinking problem. Rumor has it she was caught drunk a whole lot in the streets of Britain, the streets of London. Well, eventually she took her routine to other parts of Britain and tried to make a little money by herself, but I think that she probably got exploited by a whole lot of different men. And what wound up happening was that she eventually had to get herself back underneath the protection of Peter Caesar and Dunlap, the two men who had been legally separated from her. They believed that she possibly got pregnant by Mr. Dunlap, the white man, the ex-medic. But it's not completely known if she got pregnant by him. What is known is that during her 2-year hiatus from performing, is that she did get baptized. She got baptized at a Catholic church by a man who joked that he wasn't too much taller. I mean, that him and her were the same height. Because on a side note, Saarah Baartman was only 4.5 feet tall. She wasn't tall at all. She was very short. And, you know, down south, I've seen a lot of women like that. They got like from the waist up, their body looked like a 13 or 14-year-old girl. And their legs is not, their legs match their butt. But, you know, ass just big. I'm talking about 40, 50, sometimes 60, 70-inch hips on top of a body that looks like a 13 or 14-year-old girl up top. That's how she was shaped. But once she hooked up with Peter Caesar and Dunlap, Dunlap got sick, and eventually he died. But Peter Caesar, the mixed guy from South Africa, he decided to take her act to France. And I think it would only be a couple years later before she would be gone, because France was a drastically different culture than Britain. What ended up happening in France is that it was hard for both of them to schedule shows. And then when they did succeed at scheduling shows, she had to do extremely long performances. She had to start earlier at 11 o'clock and sometimes perform to 5 or 6 with just a few breaks in between performances. There was a lot of times where she got frustrated and Caesar would bully her, get back on stage. We're making money. What are you doing? I know you're tired. Suck it up. Hit on the butt with a stick. Get on up there. Eventually, Caesar made about as much money as he could make off Saarah Baartman in France, Paris. But after he gathered up about $6,000, according to his will, he got on a boat and went back to South Africa. And he handed her over to some very, very shady characters. Basically, it was the French, quote-unquote, scientific community. And they, quote-unquote, examined her all over. Probably had sex with her, put her on display, completely exploited her a lot. They realized she was a heavy drinker. And, the French are a lot more brash. They some sissies, but they brash. They paid her in alcohol and just gave her a place to stay. After, a year and a half or so, she got handed over yet again. And the last guy who dealt with her, a guy by the name of Alvarez, he was the last person who had her in his possession, next to last person. He exploited her to the fullest. He would make her dance and do her performances from 11 o'clock in the morning almost to 11 at night with almost no breaks. She started to get tired. She started to get exhausted. She broke down a whole lot on stage and just, the French laughed at her, mocked her, and they thought it was just a disaster. But at the same time, they thought she was a funny and disastrous woman to laugh at. One time, she walked into a room full of French women dressed up very nice, and they did this real exaggerated, pretending like they were terrified. They ran around and pulled their hair and threw their hands in the air and fell all on the ground, and Saarah Baartman just broke down crying. Now, when the French women realized that they had hurt her feelings bad, they all gathered around her. And as the person Rachel Holmes talked about in the book, she said the French women felt real bad about how they made her feel. So they gathered around her, like a dozen women gathered around her, and they laid their hands and their heads all over her. A lot of them laid their head all over her butt and everything else. It was a kind of strange and odd scene, but this was the type of stuff she was going through in France, Alvarez, after he exploited her for just about every penny that he could, eventually it got to the point to where she wasn't that big anymore. And what ended up happening was that he decided to sell her contract to the French scientific community. And once she was handed over to the last group of people, they really looked at her. They were the ones who, if you look at a lot of the photos of Saarah Baartman, they were the ones who drew a whole bunch of pictures of her. They drew a lot of pictures. They studied her like a specimen. Man, I can't find those pictures. I should have bookmarked stuff in this book so that I could find the pictures. But they drew a lot of pictures of her. They did a lot of measuring of her body. Here they go. Let me show them to you real quick. Excuse me for not being the best uploader. That's actually another African woman, but this is one picture they drew of her. There's another picture. Here's another one. This is her vagina, picture of her vagina that they drew because they had large, they call fabulas. There it is. That's actually her body after she died. Actually, let me go back a couple pages. Got some more pictures. You know, you see the guy right there. He's holding up like his little, little thing they hold up to their eye so they can see better. This is the guy right here. His name is Jorge Cuvier. This is the man who cut her up after she died. This is the SOB. This was a guy who, in Britain, his name was Sir Rump. He had a big rump. Whenever we say rump, it's actually him we're talking about. They were some British people who had big butts, and they kind of joked that there must be some type of ethnic relation somehow. You know, they tried to figure out were these white folks ethnically related to Saarah Baartman. Here's another picture. It says that this is a cartoon, December 1811. This is the Duke of Clarence, proposing on his knees, proposing to Saarah. A notorious fortune hunter, the Duke had been famously turned down by at least 9 heiresses, and at the time of the cartoon was averaging about 1 successful marriage proposal a month. This is her baptism certificate. This is Saarah's baptism certificate. And she died December. In case you want to celebrate the day she died December 29, 1815. These are a group of people who handled her. Here's a handful, a few more pictures of her. Look at how the guy got his head all down there on her butt, near her butt. There's another picture they drew. And there's another one. Now, as I'm talking, I'll explain the last few days of her life or whatever. What ended up happening was that after they drew all these pictures, they started to study her body a whole lot, And Saarah Baartman got sick a lot because you have to remember that she was from South Africa. Here are the people right here. Pictures of some of the people who captured her and used to make money off of her. But anyways, during the last few years of her life, she became a real big-time experiment. The guy who I showed you the picture of, Jorge or George Cuvier, he was kinder to her. Another man who dealt with her was a lot more brash. He stuck his fingers all into her anus, up into her vagina, because they would split her anus open and try to see was there something in her butt, down in her anus that made her butt so big. She got sick a lot. Remember, she was from South Africa. Africa got 3 seasons. It's hot, and then it's warm. And then it's hot, hot, warm again. Africa don't have a summertime. South Africa can get cold, but not very. Maybe in the 60s, the upper 50s at the coldest. And in France, it snows, And usually when it snows, there's 0 humidity, and it gets down to the 20s and below. And Saarah Baartman, she smoked, so she developed bronchitis, flu, and she thought that the alcohol that she was drinking made her feel better. And like I said, she ultimately succumbed to what I believe was a combination of bronchitis, flu, and syphilis. Because I do think, without a doubt, especially as you've seen in those pictures, they were having sex with her. These little private meetings they would do, they were having sex with her, period. and she probably got syphilis, and at the time it had no cure. And when she died, that guy I showed you the picture of, George or Jorge Cuvier, he cut her body all up. He removed her vagina. He removed different body parts and put them in a jar. And he took, he put a body cast all over her body, and molded and put her body into a like saltwater saline solution that would preserve her body. And she stood in that state for 175 years. It was 1970 before they bought some of her remains back in 1970. It was Nelson Mandela back in the early 2002, where he got the full body. He got her bones, the full body, and even all her body parts left. But when she died broke, and she had three things. She had a copy of her contract to perform, a baptism certificate, and a handkerchief that she used to wipe her tears. That was all she had. We got the book makes me think, that we got to honor and respect black women more. She would probably, I don't know how she would feel. I always wondered, how did she feel doing all this? Did she enjoy doing it? Because like I said, the Duke of Earl, the Duke of Cambridge, all these people, she got to spend time with all these rich people. She got to bathe in a silver bathtub with honey and milk, with milk and aloe. She did make money, but I think the people that was over her gave her just enough money to survive. But, that pretty much concludes the sad and tragic story of Saarah Baartman. And, black women have to stop exploiting themselves, because at this day and age, pimping is, there's still pimps out there, but, any woman that prostitutes herself nowadays is doing just that. She's prostituting herself. If you dance up on stage, I ain't gonna lie, I like the bodies of black women. I look at booty clapping videos on the internet. I look at them. But, everything today is by her own voluntary choice and will. So if a woman is exploited, she's exploiting herself. Not everybody looks at it like that, but she's exploiting herself. But on December 29th this year and every year after, take a little time to remember Sister Saarah. And please, if you get time, read this book. It's called African Queen, the Real Life of the Hot Knot Venus, by a woman named Rachel Holmes. It's a real good book. Anyway, that concludes this 3-part video series. Hope you learned something. Peace out.